Hello, everyone. Welcome to another session of the Expert Talk series. Thanks for tuning in. And the topic for today's talk is building a career as a full stack web developer in 2021. And we have a very special speaker with us. I'm excited to introduce Mehul Mohan. Mehul,
Thank you so much,
um,
Adarsh.
is a, yeah, Mehul is a CSE major from BITS Pilani, Goa. He's a full stack developer and a WWDC 2019 scholar, which stands for Apple Worldwide Developers Conference. He's an author of two books and runs a startup helping people to learn to code real world technologies with the next generation coding practice platform called Codam. He also likes exploring and exploiting security vulnerabilities in systems and is listed in the Hall of Fame of companies like Google, Microsoft, and Sony. He also runs a YouTube channel with around 150K subscribers, which has been viewed over 18 million times, which also goes by the name Codam. So I'm sure that most of us like might have come across content from his channel at some point. I used to watch his videos in my first year, and like last year, I was like it came to me as a surprise when I found out that he was still an undergrad, just like us, and yet he's so active in so many things. And yeah, I found this to be very inspiring, and yeah, I'm very excited to introduce. Also, I would like to tell the audience that we do have a Q&A session after the talk, so if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the live chat, and with this we can get started. Over to you, Mehul.
All right. Thank you so much, Adarsh, for the warm introduction. I'll just start by sharing my screen. I have a very small presentation with you guys through which I can walk you through and actually take you through my journey as well of becoming a full stack developer and all the learnings which I have throughout that journey. So let me just go ahead and quickly share the screen so that we have the presentation with us. I hope everyone can see the screen. Let's see. Yeah. All right. So this will be a general walkthrough of things you can do and you should do in 2021 in order to become a full stack web developer. We're going to cover the basics of, what does it even mean to be a full stack developer and how you can approach something like this. If you have no idea at all, if you're somebody who's new, I'm assuming a baseline case where I would try to start from a point where everyone can pick up, right? So if you're somebody who has little experience with HTML, CSS, you can still figure out your way depending on where you are in the journey. Before we start, I would just like to, although others introduce myself, I would just like to introduce myself again because apparently I have the section in the presentation. So I am a full stack developer myself. I like to call it that way because as a full stack developer, I am able to deploy complete end-to-end projects. That means if you give me a design or if you give me a sort of inspiration, I would be able to create a front end for it in React.js, in Next.js, TypeScript, stuff like that. I would be able to code up a simple backend server, integrate front end and backend, and deploy it on an infrastructure like AWS or DigitalOcean or Heroku or GitHub Pages. There are a lot of solutions out there. So I learned a lot of stuff, honestly, by freelancing over the last 5 years. I'm not an active freelancer now, but I used to freelance a lot when I started off in 2013, 2014, partly because that was one way I explored that. First of all, I could make some money on the side. That's obviously true. But secondly, what I saw was that there was real opportunity in terms of work. I could see the industry level work, which you probably would not see as a 14-year-old, right? People will often say that you're too young for this, just go do this, go do that. So the only way I could have done some real work and seen how people need to, how people debug and what sort of issues people usually face in cPanel, WordPress hosting, all that stuff. I got introduced to that when I was freelancing. So that I do consider as a major part of my learning as well. Like others said, I am a WWDC scholar, Apple 2019 scholar, which means that they would just sponsor your trip and your stay there for a week in San Jose, California. You get a lot of fun and all that experience just because you were able to clear a round which required you to code application. So that's pretty cool if you're a developer. I also run a YouTube channel, CodeDam, by the name of CodeDam itself, which is close to 150K now, 18 million plus views. And I also run a startup called CodeDam.com, which is CodeDam only. But this is a separate thing from the YouTube channel in the sense that it tightly integrates hands-on learning experience as well. So it's not about like you're just watching videos and doing everything on yourself. It's more about, hey, you have watched 5 videos now. How about you tell me how you can you do this particular concept now within your browser? So you will have, for example, if you're learning Node.js and you just figured out how to work with file system API access, now you have a couple of challenges to test your knowledge, right? So it's more about learning programming by hands-on practice instead of just watching video content or consuming content through live streams. So anyway, coming back to the topic for today, what exactly is full stack? I like to break down full stack in a bunch of layers, right? So layered approach is something which you can take when you're learning full stack as well, because these layers are more or less independent from each other, you can say, but they are also dependent in one way or another, which we'll see. So like I said, layers in web development is something you can categorize full stack development in: front end, back end, and infrastructure, right? So I would say that infrastructure also lies a little bit outside full stack development. It kind of like goes into DevOps and stuff. But as a developer, as a full stack developer, at least I had to learn a few bits of those parts as well, because when you're deploying an application online, you got to have that knowledge, right? If you do not have that, either you would be stuck with a platform as a service platform, which is like Heroku, for example, or Vercel. You could not be like using AWS or infrastructure stuff, which is usually cheaper and requires a little bit of more knowledge. So this is not a strict guideline enforcing you that these are the things you need to learn in order to become a full stack developer. It's more of a opinion, number one. And number two is my journey of becoming a full stack developer and being confident in deploying any sort of application you can give me online with having scalability and everything in mind. So I could consider right now how well an application would scale depending on what infrastructure you're using, what sort of code you have written, so on and so forth. So let's get into these one by one. I'm going to start actually in a reverse order because infrastructure is sort of the lowest layer. But we'll see how to approach these things, how to learn these things in the reverse order again. So we'll start with front end. So anyway, starting with infrastructure, what exactly is infrastructure? What does it mean? So for me, I have categorized this in the way that it usually involves you as a person to manage servers, databases, serverless configuration. Basically, if you're an AWS person who's trying to deploy some application online but do not really know a lot of AWS, I would say these are some of the things you would do, right? So as a person, if you want to deploy a simple API server, the simplest way you can think of is creating an EC2 instance, logging into it, and just running your application like you run on local. So doing those stuff, setting up a database maybe on a separate EC2 or maybe using something managed by AWS or stuff like that. So working with a few things is what goes into infrastructure. If you're doing something like AWS Lambda, then managing the serverless configurations, using code as your infrastructure is also a pretty cool thing. But doing all this management stuff is what goes into infrastructure mostly. Deploying applications on the cloud provider, just like I said, I mostly have experience with AWS. There are a lot of good other cloud providers as well, Google Cloud, Azure. I also have experience with DigitalOcean, but honestly, it's not that much powerful in the sense. I would say it's a great platform for beginning and starting off, but it lacks a lot of platform as a service, although they are trying to add it more and more every single day. But yeah, that's one thing you can consider. Yeah, like I said, these are some of the platforms. Heroku, I'm pretty sure a lot of people already know because of the ease of use which it brings in. But these are all most of the options, most common options, I would say, right now in the industry. The layer two, which is just above infrastructure, is the backend. So the backend is the actual code which you write on your infrastructure, right? So the moment you create an EC2 instance or create a server, you gotta code it, right? That's the use of it. Otherwise, what's the use of creating just a server somewhere? So all of your business logic, all of the authentication of users, handling sensitive data, stuff like this goes inside backend in the form of code. Now this code could technically be in any particular language, right? It's not a restriction. It could be Node.js, it could be Python, Rust, C++ as well, even. Um, so it's more about, this is a generic thing. Backends could be coded in any particular language or framework, but the motive remains same, that you gotta process business logic, you gotta do sensitive like card transactions and stuff like, and API keys and managing all that stuff on the backend, which you don't really want to be exposed to the public. So things like these happen on the backend, which is a server which is built on the top of the infrastructure which you just got, right? So you own this code, you own the infrastructure servers as well. So this is the place where you would write your code with the help of frameworks, validate user info, sending assets and pages to front end as well. So your front end, your client, your browser, when they visit your example.com website and it enter, your backend is the one which is responsible for sending the first page, right? The index.html file. That file is actually sent by your server to the browser. Now, in a lot of cases, that backend which sends the index.html is not really a server as per se, but it's more like a CDN, which is a fancy name of a server optimized for just sending static assets, right? So static assets are CSS files, JavaScript, HTML, only that stuff. But more or less, if you're hitting an API endpoint, or if you're doing any sort of dynamic stuff, chances are you're hitting your layer two, that is your backend. Then it's you might have guessed by now, this is a bridge between your infrastructure and front end. So infrastructure is the underlying hardware and underlying things, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, things which are using to host your application. And then front end is the end user which sees your application, right? And back end is the bridge. So it allows your front end to communicate, through back end to your infrastructure. So if you're having a video file uploaded on S3, then technically you can plug your backend in, although you can just link S3 in front end as well. So not a good example, but you get the idea that backend is basically a bridge between your infrastructure where you're hosting everything and the front end, which the user sees eventually. Then, of course, front end is the last layer, which you have in a full stack. So this is usually what people see on their browsers. And honestly, if you replace the front end with pretty much like mobile application, then this would still work. Because what is a mobile application? At the end of the day, most of the application requires some sort of communication with the outside world, right? Especially in today's world when there's internet access and multiplayer games and all that stuff. So although you have the functionality coded in, but layer three, the front end of the application, the actual app, is usually requiring all the back end and infrastructure as well. So you can pretty much make a presentation out of how to become a mobile application developer, full stack mobile application developer. I'm not sure if that's a term, but that would just replace layer three with mobile apps. So anyway, this involves like all the UI, UX interactivity, everything which you might have guessed. If you go to Facebook, the layouts, the buttons, the colors, the speed, the how fast a page feels, how responsive a page feels, stuff like that. And this is built completely with HTML, CSS, JavaScript, at least in today's world. WASM WebAssembly is coming, so that might have a little bit of impact on the interactivity and computation, which you do with JavaScript. But for the foreseeable future, for the most part, these three technologies will be the fundamental, the underlying, the base technologies for the front-end web development scenario, right? And of course, you have frameworks and UI libraries to build on top of them. You almost never really work on a production application which is just HTML, CSS, JavaScript these days, right? It could happen that you're shipping on production, which is just HTML, CSS, JavaScript, but your development setup would usually be more than that. If you're using Gatsby, for example, it kind of ships HTML, CSS, JavaScript only, but React as well. But if you're starting exporting the website, it will be just HTML, CSS, JavaScript. But your development setup would be much more enriched with frameworks and UI libraries and all that stuff. So it's very important in today's world to have the knowledge of what all is available there, which is popular, number one. But number two is having a domain expertise or having some sort of good grip on at least one of the popular frameworks and UI libraries, and we'll come to that. So the question now becomes, how do you start once you have the basic information of what a full stack developer consists of, what all you need to learn, in terms of layers, infrastructure, backend, frontend. The question is, how do you start learning all of this stuff now? Well, first of all, just realize that full stack is actually a very broad field to master, right? So the only reason I do full stack development honestly is because I started early and I did not have other people around me which could help me with different things. So I had to learn those things on my own, because otherwise I was just stuck with an application half finished, which I either could not create a front end for or could not deploy on some hosting provider. So I had to learn it out of need. But if your need is probably getting an internship or getting a job, there are usually you would be able to get employable status if you're just a front end developer or a back end developer, or even a cloud engineer like AWS, and people who know their way around those consoles and everything. That's also actually a good job as well these days. So if you know your way around the stuff, that's completely okay. You don't really need to have a complete domain expertise of the full stack. That is, you are the best front end developer, you are the best back end developer, you're the best engineer in DevOps and infrastructure management and all that stuff. So what happens is that usually I recommend people who work on their own, either they are starting off or out of just interest. If they want to learn everything at once, they should start considering, once they've learned front end, they should move on to back end, and then move on to infrastructure stuff. But give it a lot of time, because like I said, it is a huge field, and you would not be able to just learn every single thing in a week, in a month, or even in 4 months, 3 months. It will take a lot of time, it will take a lot of experience. So stay calm there. But how do you start it eventually is that you start it in a reverse way. That, of course, if you want to get started, you would start with front end, because you need some UI visible on the web development part, because web development at the end of the day is for users, right? Whatever application, whatever project you're deploying, the end goal usually is that either you as a developer deployed it for your own use case or the end user's use case, right? And if you're creating a web project, if you're creating a website, it got to have a front end. So you start with the front end, and honestly, front end is the easiest part as well in all these three layers. At least that's what it feels to me like. The easiest part to begin with, at least you can say that. So layer 3 is front end, back end, infrastructure. So you start in reverse, and then there is a certain concept which I like, which is like fixed versus replaceable tech in every single layer. So it's more like some things you have to learn in those areas, right? In those industry level skill sets, and a lot of things are replaceable with some other things. For example, we'll see that in front end about React and Angular. So these things are replaceable, right? As per se, for backend, Node.js and Python, these things are replaceable with each other. But HTML, CSS, JavaScript for front end, it's not replaceable, right? Linux basics on layer 2, it's not replaceable in backend. So stuff like that. So let's see that in a much better way. So layer 3 front end is, like I said, it consists of a few fixed technologies and a lot of technologies which are, you can say, replaceable. So HTML, CSS, JavaScript, fixed. You have to learn it. There is no way around. If you just start from React, eventually you're gonna hit a wall, and you have to come back to JavaScript in order to be more productive. Sure, you can keep on going, and you can keep on learning React and all that fancy stuff out there, Webpack and stuff. But if your fundamentals about JavaScript are not clear, right? If you are confused between array methods, or you don't really know your way around loops and basic programming stuff, variables and scoping, then you're going to have a really hard time when you're stuck with something specific in those frameworks and everything. So taking a look at just making sure that you're not fooling yourself, and you really know basics, and you're really confident with the language, is super important. Now, it's not important to this is the part where people get tricked up, is that they try to master the basics before they move on to the next thing. It works for some, it does not work for others, right? You have to figure out what works for you. For me, I am the kind of guy who likes to take multiple passes as acting. That means that in the first pass, I will learn some basics, a few basics of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then move on, right? I'll see the practicality of the next tools. Then in the second pass, I'll come back to HTML, CSS, JavaScript again, revise what I have learned, and then figure out some new things along the way. In the third pass, I'll figure out something new, and that's how I learn. I'm always in the learning mode. So I'm usually, even now, I try to discover something new about V8, JavaScript, anything which I see could be helpful, right? A lot of people really want to cover everything at first and then move on to the next thing. That usually does not work, because there is so much to learn anyway, right? You would not be able to move to the next big thing if you're just stuck with the previous one. So yeah, that's one thing I wanted to say in the learning part. That is, take your time, but move fast, but make sure you are coming back to the things which you have missed. So the next thing is Chrome DevTools, which you can see usually used for debugging and stuff. And this is also, as a front-end developer, you should absolutely learn. This is one of the things which is not talked about a lot, and that is how you should debug your code using Chrome DevTools as a front-end developer, right? So there are a lot of fancy extensions and Redux DevTools and React DevTools and all that stuff, but for the most part, you need to know your way around at least those 4, 5, 6 common tabs which you have in Chrome DevTools: elements, network tabs, sources, console, stuff like this. So you should know about that. You should know how to use that, because that will save you a lot of development and debugging time, which otherwise you would manually spend on writing those console log statements and hacking your way around debugging, right? So spend some time. This is actual good use of time, because this will save you a lot of time, which then you can use for learning new things. Then the replaceable stack is there, React, Next.js, Angular, Vue, Svelte is also there. So things like these are the place where you have to make a choice, right? Now, I usually say to people that if you are absolutely confused that what you should pick up, try to figure out what works the best for you. Just use every single thing for a particular day or a week, and see which one interests you the most and go with that. But the other way around is that if you're following someone, or if you're following a person, like me, for example, I use a lot of React, and I say that React is a good and can help you building a solid application. You can take that advice. So that's one way to go about. But more or less, it's your responsibility to figure out one thing which you want to learn for the next 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, right? Take as much time as you want in order to figure out that thing, whether it's React, whether it's Angular, whether it's Vue, whether it's Svelte, whether it's any new kid in the town. But do not oscillate between them once you have decided. You don't want to be learning React for 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and then switch to Angular. That is just disastrous, because you would eventually lose out what you have learned on React, number one. And number two is that they are usually the same. They are usually the tools which are used to accomplish the same things, right? So it does not make a lot of sense to just oscillate or learn all of them. I'm talking about these popular frameworks, React, Angular, Vue, stuff like this. So figure out which you want and then stick with it, right? Make it your own tech stack. Make it something which you believe you can pretty much build anything out of it, right? So for me, it's React and Next.js. Next.js is basically React only. For you, it could be Angular. For somebody else, it could be Vue. So figure out which one you like and stick with it. Then learn the ecosystem of technologies around it, right? TypeScript is not necessarily as a fixed tech, but I would say if you want to level up as a front-end developer, if you want to increase your code quality and code production quality and output and reliability of your code, then TypeScript is a very good thing to consider, because it will help you bring a lot of benefits of dynamically typed language into the JavaScript world, which is statically typed language into the JavaScript world, which is a dynamically typed language. So what you want to do is eventually learn about TypeScript, eventually, not really right away, learn about TypeScript and see how it can help you fix a lot of bugs and fix a lot of things while you're coding it, right? JavaScript becomes super messy at large scale code bases, and you need some sort of typing system, whether it's a linter, whether it's a TypeScript, whether it's Flow. Something is required, whether it's your IDE providing you help around the way. You absolutely cannot work blindly with JavaScript in large code bases. I have experienced it firsthand, and I have experienced it in such a way that I had to manually change the whole project to TypeScript in a single night, in a couple of nights. So that's absolutely, I would say, if you just take it with you when you're developing something from scratch, which would be a big thing eventually. So that's something you can consider to avoid technical debt 1 year, 2 year down the line, which I did not, unfortunately. But yeah, anyway. So yeah, the next few things are mostly around the tech stack, around the technologies which you chose above. Like for React, Next.js, Material UI, and Tailwind CSS are a few good solutions to pick up for the UI part, and just making sure your UI looks all nice and cool. Sure, you can go ahead and learn CSS and do all the UIs yourself, but usually that is not the way you want to go about in a production level application, because there your goals and your focus are getting things done and making sure the end product is appealing to the user and works and is high quality, instead of learning, right? So it's absolutely fine for learning CSS. So if you want to learn CSS, it's absolutely fine to build projects scratch straight away from CSS. But if you're developing a project which you need to be high quality, and you want to focus more on the business logic, you might want to abstract away all these things to other frameworks and other systems, right, which can handle this in a much better way than you can. Yeah, and it's a truth, right? So you don't really want to reinvent the wheel. The layout systems which are there, the best practices which are there, you don't really want to code up again and again. That's one of the reasons why you use React or Angular in the first place. You could pretty much do everything with just HTML, CSS, JavaScript, but we don't really do that, because at the end you will eventually just develop a framework of your own, even if you do not choose these, because so many things are repetitive, so many things you need to do again and again, that you will end up creating a framework of your own in JavaScript, which will be much less reliable and a lot buggier than React or Angular, as a matter of fact. Then again, use SWR, React Query. These are a few libraries which I have used and like for data fetching as well. So these are like two important concepts in the front-end dev world. The first one is the UI, which you have got covered with Material UI and Tailwind CSS. The second one is use SWR and data fetching with React Query and use SWR. So once you have that, data fetching connects your front end to the back end, right? So that's the link. And these libraries, React Query and use SWR, help you in the way that it manages all the state machine logic for you, where the request is currently, is the data loaded, if you want to refetch it, if you want to clear the cache, if you want to just fetch the value from cache and then make a network request as well, and then update the cache. So there's a lot of stuff you will realize that goes into data fetching alone and managing all that stuff alone. And if you're using an out-of-box solution, again, this is for production application. This is for something which when you're building and learning to use in a robust system, right? It's not about that you skip over fetch in JavaScript and then directly use these things. It's not like that. You should learn about fundamentals. You should absolutely learn about the basics, how everything works without everything, which I have mentioned here in terms of Next.js, React, TypeScript. You should know about them, but once you know about them, you should always try to use, and you should always try to consider at least using some external libraries, some external things which are already built, already managed, and are high quality, right? Because they will help you focus, like I said, help you focus more on the business logic of the problem than just getting stuck as a developer on why this code is not working, or so in that case. But of course, when you're in the learning phase, you should absolutely try everything in terms of basics, not really everything in terms of every single library out there, and get a very solid understanding on the basic, at least on the fixed parts, right? These fixed parts are absolutely fixed. They could not be replaced, or they could not be pretty much skipped, except for TypeScript here. You can skip it, but it's my personal preference that you should try to learn it if you have time. All right, so once you are done with the front end layer, and once you are into it a little bit, you are using React query and stuff to get data from some third-party APIs, for example, you might want to create your own backend, and you are figuring, how should I go about this? How should I learn this? So this is when you encounter your first meeting with backend. So for this, I would say you should have a good amount of understanding about how to work with the Linux and systems in general, right? A little bit. I mean, navigating your way around file system using cd, ls, common commands you should know, how to display the size of a file, how to remove a file from CLI, how to remove a folder. I see a lot of people who have terminals, but they just use it for npm start, right? Or npm run dev. That's it. And they absolutely do not know anything else about it. That's a huge red flag in terms of becoming a good developer, and becoming a full stack developer as well. Because you will be running and you will be using terminal a lot of times as a backend developer, especially when you're managing remote servers, for example. Consider you're on an EC2 instance which does not have a GUI access. Then what you're going to do if you do not know about Bash? How do you install Node.js? How do you set up that Nginx reverse proxy? How do you install Docker? How do you do all that stuff? You should have your way around. You should have a little bit knowledge, not really master Linux, as in about all the kernel level utilities and all that stuff. You should not know about them initially, but learn your way around how navigating a computer works using a command line, right? That's super important. Setting up EC2 servers. Again, this lies a little bit on the DevOps side and infrastructure side. So, you could probably skip this point in the backend layer, but more or less, you should be able to create servers. You should know how to create servers. You should understand the HTTP basics. That is like one thing I think is not written here, but understanding how the HTTP protocol itself works, headers, cookies, post data, REST APIs, stuff, how it actually works, why the status code 200 is used, why status code 400 is used, when status code 500 is used, what does it mean, to have cookie expiration or local storage. Well, that's on the front end, but stuff like this. You should understand about how the underlying HTTP protocol is working, right? How HTTPS works a little bit. So stuff like this. Then for backend, I also recommend, apart from the one most important thing, which we'll come to in terms of programming language and database, you should learn a little bit about containerization and Docker, and, making sure your work environment is same as at least the staging or production environment, so that there is no discrepancy in the sense that your packages are missing or your configuration file does not work, because Docker and containerization makes a lot of stuff much easier in terms of handling and managing. Then the most important thing is, of course, you should learn a language. You should learn a programming language alongside with a database, right? I guess I have not written a database here, but programming language, it's a personal choice. You could go with Node.js, you could go with Python, you could go with Rust, you could go with Ruby, you could go with PHP. There are so many options out there. um, Try your way out. I started with PHP initially, then shifted to Node.js after working 3-4 years with PHP, because eventually I figured out that, hey, I am using JavaScript anyway on the front end, and I know TypeScript now, and Node.js can use a lot of JavaScript knowledge already, so why not just use that? So as a full stack developer, as a person who was responsible for developing both front end and back end, it became a little less burden for me to work with a bunch of different languages in terms of syntax and rules and everything. So that was my reason of shifting to Node.js completely. So yeah, I mean, pick up anything which you like. If you have worked with Python, try Django, Flask, thing like these. If you are working with Rust or something which you want to explore, you can also do that. So yeah, so that's one thing. Pick up one thing and use it, master it, work with it, create a lot of APIs, create a lot of code with it, create a lot of CLI tools as well. A lot of times you're going to see a lot of your backend knowledge would come much handy in terms of creating automated tools, right? Because automated tools usually are scripts and something which do not have an explicit GUI of themselves. So they are mostly like notification dispatchers, or something like cron jobs or something. So that really helps. This layer 2 in itself is something which you can use as a developer to just increase your productivity a lot, right? So there's that. Then again, there's TypeScript, which was also in front end. Then of course, like I talked about HTTP fundamentals, you should consider taking a look at REST. Definitely. GraphQL, maybe not, but consider about REST, because REST is still the most popular way of creating APIs out there. So you should know about HTTP status codes and stuff like that. And then it boils down to that you should know about HTTP in general. So you should learn about that as well, how the internet actually works. Then of course there are, like I said, with a specific environment, there comes a specific set of technologies and specific set of environments which you should master. Like Joey is one of the libraries for Node.js for data sanitization and validation from user. So this lies a little bit in the security aspect. So if you are a backend developer, you are automatically responsible for creating secure code as well. And one of the first principles of security is that you should never trust user data. Always consider user data as untrusted threat. So this is like one way to go about in order to parse data as in the format which you're expecting, and reject it if it's not. One thing which is not mentioned here is, again, like I said, databases. So stick with a database. It could be SQL, it could be NoSQL. MongoDB is there, which is a pretty solid companion of Node.js. It works pretty nice. Other than that, SQL, MySQL, Postgres also works just fine. So databases are not actually hard to learn themselves. You should be just willing to understand why do we need them in the first place. What is the common syntax to access data, how to extract out data, how to insert data. Basically performing those CRUD operations and knowing how to perform them are more than enough when you're starting off to create any sort of authentication application, registration, password reset features, email verification, all that stuff. Because these are all built on CRUD stuff, right? Create, read, delete, update. So understanding about databases is also important, but that comes after you have learned a little bit about the language, because database again links with a particular language, right? So a programming language like Node.js will be a bridge between your front end and database, right? So that's the analogy. Then of course you finally come to layer 1 infrastructure, which is, I want to not really say it's a part of full stack development, or backend development in general. But I do consider that if you're learning this, you should, if you have the option to learn this, then you should go ahead and learn this, because this will make you um, basically a one-man army sort of thing, where you can go ahead and do anything you want on your own once you know how to work around servers and everything. But like I said, this whole process is going to take you some time, so don't really consider that you can get up the next day and just be a master in all these 3 layers. But keep these, the point of the webinar is to provide you information of what all is there you could know. The option and the choice is yours, whether you want to know it, whether you want to learn it or not. So like I said, it consists of servers, serverless differences, when to use what, managing these platforms as a service, services, S3, Lambdas, SQS, stuff like this. That's mostly like, making your way and understanding how the cloud and things in the cloud and managed stuff works, right? So it's more about when you are deploying your application for people to see and you expect a decent amount of traffic, then it's something you want to get into. Or if you're working in a startup which expects decent amount of traffic and you are trying to figure out, learn those things. But yeah, that's something you should consider as a full stack developer, at least in my opinion. Although it does not really go by the book, that is, the definition does not say that you should understand and use infrastructure as well, but that usually helps. One thing I have seen is that a lot of people try to learn everything, which I also covered in the front end slide, that you're trying to learn Angular and React and Vue and Bootstrap and Material UI and Tailwind and everything, and you get confused that there is so much to learn. You absolutely don't need to learn everything. You need to learn a very specific technology tech stack, which will enable you to build a lot of stuff, right? So for me, I can tell you that I could build pretty much a lot of front-end UIs just using HTML, CSS, JavaScript, React, and let's say Tailwind, right? And just include a React query in that as well. Just 6 technologies, out of which also JavaScript and React has a lot of overlapping, because technically I would be just using React, not really any, if you're using React, you're using JavaScript anyway. So try not to learn everything, because that is a recipe for disaster. You will get confused and you'll just lose your focus and motivation to learn anything at all. So make sure you are keeping your tech stack small and deep, not wide and narrow in terms of learning. Then secondly, I would say that doing is much greater effective than learning, in terms of if you're trying to learn a particular concept, you have the option to practice it, or you have the option to watch a couple of videos. I would say practicing is much better than just watching videos and doing nothing about it, right? So that's one thing I really hope that people understand, that programming is not about passive consumption. It's more about active muscle memory building, right? You have to be coding every day. You have to be doing something every day in order to keep that momentum going. It is not something which you will understand by just watching videos. You can understand, but you will eventually not have the habit. It's like maths, right? We all have been in 11th, 12th classes. We have done integration and stuff, and that you can learn everything in the classrooms and complete all the video lectures, but unless you're solving those questions, unless you are solving these exercises again and again and again, you will not be able to solve those questions in JE. So it's more like that, right? Similarly with programming, but in a way, well, obviously programming I think is easier. So yeah, so that's one thing I would want to say. Then of course learning is of course better than doing nothing at all. So even if you're free and if you want to just keep on that momentum going up, or if you have a just an empty day where you think that you don't really feel like practicing or doing anything, then just reading a book, or maybe like just browsing through internet, reading some blogs on the cutting edge future of web development, stuff like that, is still better than just doing nothing, right? So you can make use of your time that way as well. Then opportunities as a developer are vast. I mean, I pretty much assume that everyone knows here that development and developers are one of the highest paying jobs in the world right now. And that is for a reason, because This stuff is so powerful in the sense that you can create a lot of great things out of thin air, right? And have been created all the time. You can start as creating simple websites of your own. You can start freelancing on Fiverr, which is what I did eventually when I was starting off. You can pick big projects as well on Fiverr, Upwork, all other freelance websites. And as developers, you have the ability to charge them a good amount in the sense, because programming is hard. It's not like, I won't really say it's easy. It's hard. If you want quality good work, it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of energy in building and practicing and doing all that stuff and reaching that state. So that's why you can charge so much. Then of course, depending on what your ambitions and goals are, you can look for startups, jobs. And programming actually enables you to completely deploy your own projects. If you have any idea, if you think this is interesting, you don't really have to just write it down on paper and discuss it with friends. You can actually build an MVP overnight and just see how it works out. So, and it of course allows you to build your own companies out of it as well. I mean, honestly, for me, that is what has worked out as a developer, as a programmer who does not have a lot of business contacts yet. The only thing I did is I started off creating my own product. I started off creating something I had a vision about, that, how about we practice within the browser? We have a development environment, we have challenges, we can run tests, we can do all sorts of cool stuff. And that is all managed and load balanced and all that stuff. And I could create a product and I could create a company out of it. So that is the ability and that is the power programmers have, right? If you mix programming with any sort of field, business field, you are a businessman, right? So it's super powerful in terms of doing a lot of good and doing a lot of creative work. So yeah, that is like one of the incentives you get as a developer if you are able to tweak your parameters correctly. So I would just like to summarize it with a couple of quotes, sayings, whatever you want to say it. If you're not having fun, you will give up. So it's very important that you're having fun when you're coding. And how do you know you're having fun? Is that when you're not really stressed about hitting that, job offer or internship offer or anything like that. And I know it's easy for me to say because I started off very early when I did not have any, you can say I did not have any purpose of learning programming, right? I was not learning programming because I wanted to get a job in class 9th. I just was learning it because I wanted to customize my WordPress blog, right? I wanted to add a subscribe to me widget. That's it. So for you, I would say figure out something which you always wanted to create or build, or your something which you wanted to do. If you know how to program, if you knew how to program, and work towards that goal, right? Make it a fun activity. Programming is actually fun. Most programmers do programming because they expect to get paid. Do not do programming because of the money and all that stuff, but because it's actually fun to program. And it's very true, right? When you're trying to develop, when you're trying to work on systems and you know your stuff, you'll realize it's very fun to write code and see that the computer is operating on stuff which you have wrote, right? And if you are fortunate enough to ship a product which is used by a lot of people very soon, then you will realize how powerful this stuff is, right? So I would say, like, make sure that you have fun while you learn to code, or while you're at least coding. And if you're not having fun, then evaluate why is that the case. Maybe programming is not something which gives you that maximum happiness or fun or joy out of it. And I know a lot of people get into programming and coding because it has high paying jobs and salary. But if you absolutely hate it, then it's probably time to consider something else, because there are so many things which can help you live a better life, live a happy life, which is not just high paying itself, right? So figuring out yourself, figuring out which thing works for you is something I would also like to stress about at the end of the talk, because as fancy as programming and coding might sound, it's not everything and it's not the only thing to make a lot of money, if that is your only goal. But if you're learning coding for the fun of it, then it changes and opens so many doors for you. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the presentation. Thank you so much for everyone who has stayed so far. You can reach out to me through this links. This presentation is also live on fs.mehulmohan.com. If you want to visit again anytime, you can do that. And that will be the end of presentation. I would be happy to take any questions if you have.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mehul. Your
Hi,
presentation was
everyone.
very informative, very detailed, and I think for beginners and I think even experienced developers, it would have been very, very useful. So we have a few questions from our audience as well as our college community.
Mhm.
So the first question is, so you have sort of touched upon this. How much time do you spend between learning and building? Because if you start building without a lot of learning, you won't really put out a lot of good code. But at the same time, if you keep learning, you go down the path of tutorial hell. So how do you strike a balance between that?
So the way I did it is that I used to build a lot and I would learn whenever I'm stuck with whatever I'm building, right? So like you said,
Mm.
if you do not learn beforehand, your code quality and everything affects. But the fact is, you don't really want to produce a lot of high quality code right away when you're starting to learn. This is a process. This is a journey. It's not one day you will wake up and watch a video where you will see how to produce high quality code and you will be able to do that. You have to go through those hundreds of and thousands of files where you wrote so much bad code, and then you will be at a position at a point when you are able to write good code, right? So it's a process you have to go through anyway, and the more you build, the more it speeds up and more it, you know, brings you closer to that position. So learning is definitely super important and building is super important as well. So I would keep those things in parallel. I'll try to build as much as I can, but at the side, I would also try to learn as much as I can. So it's not like a 80-20, 30-70 thing. It's more about a 50-50 stuff, if you want to say it. But yeah, if you can, try to build a lot.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So another question is, so this is about your uh, company, Codam. So on the website, there is a feature which allows you to. There's a hands-on interface, which is really cool. So the question is, when you have an idea for a feature, what's the process you follow to convert that idea uh, into into code, and also what are some of the issues that you face along the way, and how do you deal with all of those?
So the good way to go about this is to actually write a small specification of how your feature should look like. Just brainstorm a little what you think all should go in. If you're creating, as a fun exercise as well, if you're trying to create a login page or registration authentication page of some sort, you would just go ahead and open up a Google Doc and write what all things should go: username, password, password reset, email verification, dashboard here and there, and then start implementing them one by one. But honestly, I just did not. I do not really follow this approach myself. I usually try to go and create a mind map of these things. But now, when I've worked with a lot of big projects and big things, I have seen that this actually would help you um, structure and organize product in a much better way. So I wish I would have created this approach earlier. So even if you're creating a small project, writing a small specification of how the final thing should look like is usually a good idea, right? So if you're creating any sort of real-time multiplayer application as well, just figure out small key elements which you think are important in the application, and then try implementing them one by one.
Got it. Makes sense. So, so like your journey has mostly been through self-learning and so on. Uh, and also there is a trend right now of people pursuing a master's degree to gain experience in a field of their interest. Do you think for full stack development a master's degree is required or even relevant? And once they do get the degree, or once you have gained all the skills, when you want to get a job, how do you stand out from the rest of the people who are also full stack developers?
So, if we just talk about the conceptual knowledge and actual practical knowledge of stuff, you don't even need a college degree, let alone master's degree, for learning full stack web development, data science, anything like that, in 2021 in today's world. I mean, you don't even need to pay for anything, as a matter of fact, if you're willing to go 1 mile ahead and just figure out everything, every single resource, filter out stuff on your own. It is everything is out there for free. You just have to put a lot of effort if you're going a free route, but if you're taking up something paid, it just helps you a little in terms of speeding up the process. So I don't believe you even need a college degree. So I don't get why people would go for a master's degree just for becoming a full stack developer. However, with that being said, in the at least in the India ecosystem, the culture is more about tags and people who have graduated from certain college or certain, uh, like you said, certain programs, master's degree and stuff like this. They usually might get a higher preference in the jobs or in those areas. So that is an unfortunate thing. But I would say that if you are someone who knows his stuff or knows her stuff inside out, you can pretty much get a job where the company actually needs you. There are a lot of newly recently funded startups which require web developers, which require actual people, which require CTOs to build their next big app, and they are funded and they're looking for people. So you have to look for those people. You don't really have to look for big companies or medium-sized companies who are looking for degrees and validation from these programs from education system.
Right, got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. So another question is, you are still pursuing your degree, and so how did you manage academics and building an entire company? What do you have? What advice do you have for students like us?
So, first of all, I did not manage academics. So, I used to study like a week before exams. I used to start, not really study. So, I used to plan and do stuff of just a week before, and then I would just, do uh, go all into that 1 week, 3, 4 days before exams. And the rest of the semester was usually just working on my own. So I kind of cheated in that way, in the sense that I was not really managing, but it's more about just postponing it to the last second, the last minute. This is not a good advice for people who want to really manage academics and everything. So honestly, I do not know if you want to get a 10 CGPA, 9 CGPA, and also be a great web developer or something which is not in the curriculum of your college studies. So this is a compromise. You have to figure out that, do you want to become a member of the system who follows the things and goes about how the system is designed, that is the college and then placements and then job, or do you want to step out of that and explore something of your own? Because that going that road will require massive effort from your side, and that could definitely not come up, could not happen if you're a number one in your class, number two, if you even aim to be a number one in your academics or your school or whatever it is. You have to take a step back, and you have to realize that you will not be able to do extra a lot of extra stuff if you're just stuck with the system things, if you're stuck with what your college is saying or what your school is saying. So that's a choice you have to make, and see what CG or what GPA is relevant for you. It's 7, it's 7.5, it's 8, it's 6, and just work towards that bare minimum work. That's what I did. Be smart, take up subjects which are higher grade. That's what I did, at least. Try avoiding going to classes if you can, and use that time to learn something new. That's a horrible advice for somebody who's looking for a good CGPA, but it's a good advice for somebody who does not want to just get stuck into the rat race, which unfortunately still continues when you get into colleges.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So now we'll probably move on to a few technical questions that you have. So there are many front-end frameworks which integrate natively with JS environments, but in case of Python development environments, there are none. So, what do you suggest for front-end development in Python environments? Or is that something that you should be even doing?
You cannot really do Python for front end, at
Mm-hmm.
least not right now. So, as a Python developer, the only thing you can do is program backends, and you have to use JavaScript or you have to use templates, HTML, CSS. You have to use JavaScript at some point if you're working with web browsers. So, there is no there's no, I would not say that you can use this or that because most of the things are a little hacky. There are ways to run Python code in browser, but that is again, Python is I think one of the libraries which compiles Python to JavaScript, but it's not a good way to go about. If you want to become a full stack developer on the front end layer, you've got to learn the JavaScript aspects of things, React, and stuff like that. If you want to do quality code.
Got it. Okay. So this is one of the questions that we got from the audience. Um, so from where could we learn production level technologies? Because a lot of the times the tutorials we find online are quite, they're at the beginner level. They don't really touch on the detailed aspects. So where do you pick up on such things?
So there's no production level technology as such. It's more about production level practices. You're gonna see the worst code written in React as well as the best code which is running on Amazon or Google or Facebook servers also in React. So it's more about the code quality and the intuition and the way you write code when you are writing it again and again and again, and you start seeing a pattern, right? When you're writing something so many times and you're refactoring it, eventually, also when you're learning from different resources, eventually you'll try and start learning that, hey, if I write this code this way and if I organize my file structure in this way, it becomes much easier to refactor later down the line compared to this earlier way. So it's most of the videos and tutorials you'll find on YouTube and all these sites, they are using production level technologies. Python, everything is production level as per se. It's more about your experience with that particular technology, and how you're organizing your file structure, stuff like this. Most tutorials do not reach there because they are not trying to build a production level application completely. So if you're trying to go down that route, I would say just taking a look at some of the open source production level applications is a good way to go about, right? So if you're not able to find any video tutorial, then try to look for projects which are on GitHub, hosted somewhere, and you know that they are good projects, right? So take a look at them, take a look at how those projects are organized, although they will seem like overwhelming because there might be a lot of configuration and a lot of files here and there. But eventually, if you try to get a grasp of them, try to get a hold of how the tech is working, you'll very soon realize that it's the fundamental parts, the fundamental things are the same things which are taught in every other YouTube video. It's more about organizing and comments and quality and making sure everything looks nice and great, and other developers are able to jump into the code base and able to understand what you have written.
Got it. Understood. Yeah. So just continuing on that, like you mentioned, some resources perhaps for you, for someone to pick up on these production level practices. And in your talk also you mentioned about infrastructure. So what are some resources you would suggest for learning about cloud infrastructures like AWS or Google Cloud?
So honestly, this is a market in itself because these cloud providers provide certifications, which then
Mm-hmm.
create exam student sort of mentality where people are now studying for actually passing AWS, which is a good thing actually. You need AWS engineers and developers for your teams, but recommended resources, honestly, right now I do not consider myself as a cloud engineer or somebody who's an expert in AWS itself. I just know a handful of technologies, lambdas, EC2s, SQS, which I already also use on CodeDam. So for me, the way I have learned it is mostly through AWS documentations. That is, they have some of the best docs available online. Then there are, of course, a great set of YouTube videos out there as well, and a lot of experimentation and practice, right? Over the past few years, I have worked with DigitalOcean a lot. So I actually have a DigitalOcean course itself on Codam itself. So that teaches you, that introduces you to the infrastructure and basics of managing servers, droplets, IP addresses, things like these. So learning a little bit about networking and HTTP is the gateway to these cloud providers as well, because then you are able to link back why you need them in the first place. So I would say figure out, before figuring out the resource, figure out your reason of using AWS. And once you have a reason, then you would have a search query in mind for that particular use case or topic, and then Google that, you search it on YouTube, look for all the places where you can find the content. That's how you can go about. If you are going for anything professional, like AWS certification or anything, then there are, of course, better organized programs, full-fledged courses for them as well.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, so then we have another question from the audience. How would you compare different full stack development technology stacks from the point of view of a beginner?
How would you compare the different full stack development stacks from the point of view of a beginner? You would not in a lot of cases, because to compare, you have to know them, number one, and as a beginner, you would not know them. So your best way to go about is that you trust either someone who knows what he's talking about, by just watching a bunch of videos where a React developer is speaking, an Angular developer is speaking, they're discussing, something is happening, so they list down the pros and cons. Or you're doing a little bit of, you're trying to create or recreate a project in all the three frameworks, a simple to do application in Vue, Angular, React. So you know a little bit about frameworks, like how much code a particular framework takes, the practices it has. So it's not like you would know it right away. You need to have other people guide you through that, and that could happen through blog posts, through videos. Search for React versus Angular versus Vue, search for the technologies which you think are competing in the space, and watch content, read content around it. That's how you would build that knowledge.
Yeah, so yeah, that answers that question. Now, another interesting question is like often when working on some projects using for full stack development, you would run into concepts which are not really related to full stack, like maybe data mining or web crawling and so on. So, how does one tackle these situations so that you do understand the technology there, but at the same time, you're not thrown off your path and you don't deviate much?
um, okay, I think it depends specifically on the type of problem which you're having, like you mentioned, data mining and the other things. So honestly, I would say I've never really encountered any data mining use myself when I was learning front end development and full stack development. But I could definitely see, if you're somebody who's working in an internship in an organization, they might have a requirement. So I would say that if you feel that that does not fit into your timeline, or that does not fit into your tech stack, and you don't really want to learn it as well, you can probably learn the bare minimum and skip it once you have completed that feature or everything. Because it's not a point that you are learning full stack development and suddenly you discover blockchain, right? And you go all into that now. That wouldn't just simply work, because you have to eventually give a lot of time and focus to a single technology in order to understand it. So data science and web development are very far away in terms of the things and knowledge which they require. And like I said, you should not jump between languages and frameworks. The similar thing is application between industry level skill sets as well. Try not to jump between them. Try not to do mobile application development and web development and data science and ML and AI and all that stuff together, right? Because at the end you will get super confused and would not be able to achieve anything in any specific field.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, So we also have, I think, just one final question. Um, so it's a technical one. Is it important to learn or implement CI/CD such as Jenkins simultaneously while working on projects?
It's not important to learn it in and out. The way I did it is I used to use Circle CI back in the days. I'm currently using GitHub Actions, but what would happen is that once you have set up a small CI/CD pipeline for yourself for the deployment, it becomes very convenient and easy to just build on top of that. Whether you want to create tests later down the line for integrating in CI/CD, whether you want to ship your code confidently if nothing is breaking, whether you want to have that automation in place when you just push it to your GitHub branch and everything is deployed online. So it definitely helps you as a developer, but it's not, I won't say that I know every single configuration option in the GitHub YAML file. I wouldn't say that. But yeah, it definitely helps to just set up that and just learn how it works, not really how to just absolutely work with it without internet access, right? So just figure out how that stuff works, what it really means to be implementing a CI/CD pipeline. And like you mentioned, Jenkins, I would probably go about something which I do not have to self-host, like Circle CI or GitHub Actions, so that I don't really get into that mess of just using my own CI/CD server at a very early stage. In fact, you don't really need to host your own CI/CD server, because there are a lot of ways to get it for free. Plus, like GitHub Actions has a very generous free tier. Plus, unless you are not in a constrained environment where you have compliances and everything, you don't really need to do it in a lot of cases. So
Yeah, great. That answers the question. Yeah, so with that, we come to the end of our Q&A segment as well. So thank you very much, Mehul, for joining us. Now I hand it over to Saurabh, who will give the vote of thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mehul. Firstly, I would like to convey to you that you are an inspiration for many of us out here. Being a student just like us, you have done great things, having a YouTube channel and having your own startup. So that is quite inspirational. And thanks a lot for taking time out for this talk today. It was
thank you so
definitely
much,
a great
Saurabh.
talk. It was definitely a great talk. You have covered everything starting from the breakdown of the different layers of full stack development to how to start and then covering the opportunity and finally answering the Q&As. We could not have asked for anything more. It was great
Thank you.
having you with us here today, Mehul. Thanks a lot for that.
No worries. Thank you so much.
Thank you.